We're going to try and make it as participatory as possible, but it's an in-conversation session with Taey and Danni, led by Susanne. This session will focus on exchanges of experience, not on skills or methodological transaction, exploring relationships, power, and professional positionalities. Methods for slowness, landing, falling, and sinking will also prompt meditation from contributors, as well as creating opportunities for open reflection. And this is when you will find the envelope with the pencils and paper inside. This is when we activate that pack. And I will let Susanne explain a little bit more how that works. But anyway, yeah. I'm just going to really quickly introduce you all. So, Susanne Bosch. For Susanne, art is a practice for entering into dialogue about social, political, and historical events, as well as an interface where through and with aesthetic forms, a different way of dealing with conditions can be tested. Danni is the project manager of Rialto Youth Project in Dublin, Ireland. Rialto Youth Project. Hello. Rialto Youth Project approaches its work from a youth and community development perspective, and the project works towards bringing about social change, providing an integrated youth service based on the needs of young people, and in particular those most at risk. And Taey is a transdisciplinary artist, writer, and listener based between London and Seoul. They employ diverse media, including soundscapes, language, moving images, and social practice and collective actions through an eco-crip lens. Taey is interested in what leaks out of the meta-narratives of our entangled social, botanical world, and how leaking can both identify pain and serve as a remedy. And I will hand over to this excellent panel.
Thank you. Yay. Great. So before we start the conversation, I have to start a couple of weeks ago, where we kind of met online, the four of us, various times, and talked about the setup here. So this is a day engaging about socially engaged art and art practice, and we realized, looking at the architecture of the space, we will be sitting on a stage, lights on, and you will be sitting there as a classical listening audience. And we kind of felt, no, it shouldn't be that way. Let's see how we can make the best out of that situation. And therefore, we kind of thought, what could be one way of doing this? And so this is a playful invitation. You all got an envelope, and it contains pages of paper and a pen. So we thought, okay, how about we're using that airspace here? And how about inviting you to submit thoughts, questions, comments via paper planes. So it means you're invited, when we start talking, to kind of feed us with questions, comments, thoughts. And question number one, do you remember how to build a paper plane? No. So does anybody know how to do it? Because we thought before we get started here, let's do paper planes. And I'm kind of inviting all of you, find out, is there anybody close to you who might remember how that works? And there's not one way. There's many ways, so we'll find out. Try. Ooh. But we also, it's really beautiful. We had, Emery is going to be the one who is kind of collecting paper planes. No matter where they land, it'll be fine. It's like, good. I do have a sense that collaboration is in place. Various versions are in the making. So, I mean, you don't have to use your paper planes. It's just in case you feel like, ooh, I have something to contribute here, then try and send it to the center space. And if... Ooh! Perfect.
That was very good.
Where did that one come from?
That was great.
Cool. It came kind of from here, right?
Oh, very
okay.
good.
Good. Great. So I think we're ready to start. What we will actually do is we have, so the theme of this more or less an hour of conversation is to have an experience exchange between all of us about wayfinding and landing. And we divided this into 3 sectors or 3 parts of addressing a certain topic, then looking at whatever arrived here, having a conversation, and then going into the next topic. So we're doing these 3 rounds. And I'm going to sit down now. Exactly. Yeah, well, I'm delighted to sit here because both of you have, let's say, a practice or a relationship with art of heart that is in an emergent state. The projects are in a phase of developing since 1 or 2 years. So that beginning stage, I think, is a really key one for socially engaged art practices. And so we kind of thought in that first phase, we'll talk a bit about the experience of starting these type of professional moments. And because they're always based on values within these relationships. For example, Heart of Glass's values are care, challenges, and collaboration, yes. And of course, each one of you comes in with your own values. And so, yeah, this is the invitation to share a bit of, okay, when a relationship starts, an invitation arrives, what happens at the beginning when you kind of start to read the space? And whoever would like to start.
Okay. So yeah, thank you for having us here. I suppose my name is Danni and I work in a youth project in Rialto. And we have had a very long history of arts in Rialto, and we've really used it as a platform for young people who have really been part of a class oppression to have a space and a place for them to use their voice and share with the world what's going on for them and their lived experience. So that's been a real part of the heart of the values of Rialto Youth Project. But also what's really important for us and is the idea of what does collaboration actually mean. And I'm sitting here today representing, for example, an organisation, and the organisation often holds a lot of power in those relationships. And do we ever talk about those powers? And how do we begin to unpack the relationship between an organisation and an artist and talk about things like power, like dynamics, like expectations of each other, like all of those things in a real meaningful way that makes us feel that we're all starting off together. And I've had to learn that a lot over time. I would have taken things very much for granted earlier on in my practice, as in the idea of you're working with an artist and you might get some funding, and when it's over, and that's the moment in time. But then from working so closely with Iohe, I really deeply began to understand this idea of heartbreak and how accountable are organisations in that heartbreak, and are we really having those conversations and talking about, you know, who gets left behind in those situations, because the organisation is there and the young people are still there, but the artist is gone. And what does that mean in terms of if you've done a long-term collaboration, which in the heart of Rialto, that's what we believe in, is longer term, because we don't often think that structural change can happen, as we all know, in you know, a 2-month block or a 3-month block. So we tend to do arts-based practice for years. So, we're in our What Does He Need process started in 2018 and we're still in it, so that stuff doesn't change. But how do you continue to build the relationship between the organisation and the artist, and then what comes from that, and who holds power in that, and then where do the young people fit in that? So the other piece for us is that we try and create this idea of a triangulation of collaboration, so that it's, the organisation representing the young people are there as well, and then the artist. And that how do we build that each person holds power in that situation, and how do you build a project then together? So that's really important for us, because what we often have to think about as well is that ultimately we're always holding the voice of young people and their needs, and then you might be involved in this really exciting project, and then all of a sudden a young person says, I actually don't want that to be put out there. And then what happens? What happens is the organisation will go, well, actually, we're going to represent the young people now. So now it's 2 against 1. So, you're working with an artist and they have this idea of an output that's going into a public space. And then they're being told again, oh, well, actually, that may not happen at the moment. So it is about what are the really deep, meaningful conversations and relationships that you need to build when you are doing this type of work. And I'm talking about it obviously from this side, because it is about how do we begin to look at power structure, dynamic, accountability, reflection, and then have that conversation. So I suppose maybe there's a lot of people doing arts in this room, that it is about how do you get to that point where those relationships are really durable, so that's just something.
And I think one thing that is really important that makes it very special to have you sit here is, I didn't introduce you, I rely on you introducing your work and you position yourself, but maybe it's important for everybody to know what's your role in that triangulation. I mean, who are you in this?
Yeah.
Just to be clear what you would call yourself professionally.
Yeah, so I suppose very often, so I am the manager of the organisation, and within the organisation we have lots of different, say, arts collaborations that have happened. You could because we've over 300 young people in the organisation, and we've a team of 25, so there could be 5 different processes happening. But again, my role is also to hold on to that and really begin to make sure the practice is developed with people, but also ultimately then it is about what are the values that are there. Are we really working on what it is we should? So I'm always kind of supportive in terms of mentorship, or trying to drive something forward, trying to pull something back maybe. So there's another power dynamic there as well that I hold, which is something that I have to stay in touch with all the time, that you're trying to build power and not ever have power over, so that's important.
Taey, do you feel like following up? I'm a bit nervous, so I might come slowly into you. I don't think I'm here because I'm good. I think I'm here because I'm lucky. And maybe respond to from what you were saying, that when you're making a project, artist comes on board, and when artists go, then the community left. And what do we do from there? That makes me to think a bit deeper that how I come in. Because I'm often in that situation that I come as a guest like this. And I sometimes host too, but mostly guest. And as a migrant, as a someone who often feel quite lost in many places, that without wanting to be a guest, I'm always a guest anyway. And I think that's maybe defines, I feel that defines my practice, that reading the room, reading the air, or reading the energy, how welcome this place could be for me, but also for everyone in the room and everything in the room. So for instance, we are in the room full of oak, and lots of light and energies, and you come from Ireland, you traveled from Germany but living in Ireland, we are in Liverpool. This kind of context matters for me, so that I know in what way I am coming as a guest, And I think being a migrant and a guest, it gives me a privileged position to see everything in the fresh eyes and doesn't need to take everything granted. So in power relation, for instance, that if the power is granted in that space so quickly, everybody's so used to that power. And when someone is outside of the power, it's very apparent. But then keeping the conversation going, it needs a lot of careful approach and also time. So in some way, I think time and space becomes a collaborator too. And returning back to the community, not all communities are really memorable. It's some communities are really good, but I'm, trying to approach to the bird watchers and fishers at the moment, and I feel like they are really not welcoming me. They are very sort of a white male culture, and every culture has different corners, and not everything. Community is the word that we use as a very soft way. But also it could be a community of bad people too. I don't know where I'm going really, but I think I'm responding to you that I'm that artist who is going and often coming back again.
Maybe I can add to that because I also come from a socially engaged art background, and I am often finding myself in that role as well, being usually a guest. And if I may add to that, it's that double situation of if an organization invites me or us, so we have a host that invites us as artists to become hosts on behalf of an organization or an institution or a context. And I often realize when it comes to values that chain of I'm all of the sudden as a guest becoming a host, I'm usually the newbie in that context, which is also a quite strange situation to invite people into a context where I feel I'm the least familiar with. So it creates that moment where I really need to have these conversations with whoever invited me to understand what are the local values here, what is the common sense here, and coming often from a different cultural background, it's always that moment with a lot of uncertainty of have I understood correctly, or trying to get a sense of, let's say, the urgency in the place, my possible role, but also the potential dangers I could get myself in, or what to really be careful about. So, yeah, and it sometimes also goes wrong. That's also to be said. Yeah. See, my alarm is telling me any paper planes. So this is, in a way, is that one? So this is a moment of us breaking a conversation between, stopping this as a trialogue. And is there maybe anything you would like to add or comment or share? By a paper plane or like that? Yeah, exactly, raising your hand. Yeah, whatever feels good.
I was really interested in hearing, also kind of think into a bit more, is in that triangulation between the organisation or the representative of the organisation, the artist and the participants. What happens in that triangulation when roles aren't as clear-cut as that? Which is something that we work here in situ, that's something that we experience a lot, where you might be the artist and the participant and the organisation at the same time. So how do we deal with this triangulation?
Great question.
It's brilliant, and the answer is conflict. But what often happens is the conflict is not ever spoken. So it's inner conflict because you, like a person might be frustrated within the triangle but isn't saying it. So then it becomes this kind of seething thing that's not that clear about where anybody is. And so for me, one of the big things is that when you're building a process or a project, how much time do you get before that to develop all those things you're talking about? And can you give yourself the space to do that? Because one of the big things you're after saying there is clarity of roles is one of the major things. We often have youth workers who think that they are artists and they might be really good at art, but they're not the artist in the room. You're the youth worker in the room. You need to work with the young people in that space to try and ensure they can engage in the best way they can. And then the artist is not a youth worker in the same way, is that your role is to, you know, bring your skills and practice and how that can transform this space. So it's clarity of roles is so important, but also talking about expectations. So what is it that we all expect from this space, and how do we meet that? And also the needs. What is it that you need to be in this space? So it's not only just asking young people that, because we ask them that all the time, but as the organisation and as the artist, what is it that you need to be able to do meaningful work in here? And then when it does come to things that, because we always get to spaces where something may happen or not, and then it is about how do we confront it without conflict, so that we do enter into that thing of, you know, as Kate is talking about, that radical honesty, that we can be really honest with where we're at without it having to be conflict. So definitely time beforehand to really begin. And we often create spaces so that in between the sessions that you do, you need to do reflection as well about how was I in the space? How were you? What did you expect to come up? Was that, you know, all of those really important conversations, because otherwise, yeah, it's conflict.
I have a slightly different perspective on that. Very honestly, because I feel like there's some safety or comfort here to be honest to each other. In sometimes when I go into the situation, often communities are much more creative, or often I turn the role sometimes that like curator or producer. They could be also vulnerable, or I could come in as more like listener sometimes. So in some way the contract is there, but when there's trust is starting to build, there's a role taking, what do you call it, turn taking. And knowing that what we want is the common goal. But even the common goal could be different. The artist could have a different idea, and the producer wants to divert into different directions, and community clearly wants something else. It could be that, too often is that. But I think that's also beautiful to discover we're coming from different contexts. I don't think not everything needs to be harmonious. And another perspective is why. Why do we suddenly all have to deliver workshops and talk and community building work? Why does this become artist's job? I like it and I'm getting sustained by that. But at the same time, I'm asking, where is the social infrastructure? Why there is no money for social workers, but more money for the artist? Why artists has to be treated any differently when the job is so easy and other people can do it too? And some, like museum people, are actually saying, well, actually, they prefer to work with activists or community facilitator rather than artists. Because the artist comes with ego, they comes with a vision or something to complete. I mean, not everybody's doing that, and everybody's rhythm is different. But then instead of seeing a person as you are this job, you are this ability and capability. My personal approach is I want to see the person. I want to see the person who has a house, who has a dog, and who has illnesses, who come to the work as a person, not as a community facilitator. So when I accept that is a human nature, I don't know, I think it's maybe a bit messy way. But I think I'm trying to say that I'm questioning that, why the artist's role is suddenly got so much bigger in the community, and where is other work is there? Where is the real infrastructural work?
There's an airplane over there looking to come. Come on, bring it
Yeah.
on.
All right.
Go for it.
Come on. Hello. very good.
Do you want to give it to them? Because it's a bit long, so you might want to summarise it.
I'll give it.
Oh, yeah, do you want to summarize it?
I want to summarize it. Okay. Oh, I need help, I think. Yeah, that would be super.
Hi.
The fact that your work started in 2018 was the date that you gave us, and I'm interested in what your and so I'm interested in your answer and then your answers as well. Like what your awareness will have changed over that time in terms of your closeness to the processes that you've had with the artists. So what are the things that you know now that you didn't know then?
I mean, I suppose for me, equality in terms of the roles and what people were bringing into the space. So I think, and I think as within an organisation, you have a bit of an ego as that organisation around that we know what the young people need and the young people are telling us. So we are then commissioning or asking somebody to come in to do that, and we know. So you're just coming in to do that. So it was very much that, there wasn't really a lot of conversations that may have happened. Whereas what we do now is we build from the beginning together. So we don't wait and then ask someone to come in, we start as one. So that's been a big piece for me. And then also, as I mentioned, the heartbreak stuff around, that you are working with people long term and you're really building, friendships and, practices, and what is it that we're doing with that and how do we create a legacy of that as well. So one of the things we've worked a lot on is turning the know-how, the stuff we know, into the say-how and having it down on paper so that it's like, because if you think about, for example, Rialto U project has a history of practice. But that artist who we've worked along may not be as involved in that previously, whereas now we are creating the methodologies together, we are creating the practice together, we are writing it down and we're putting it out together into the world as partners. So we're no longer a commissioner, we're a partner. And that's the big thing, is that are you ready to be working with people at this level? And what it takes to do that is so long and deep and meaningful. But if you're not doing that, then the heartbreak continues. And it doesn't mean it's not going to happen anyway, but it continues and it's much more damaging, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, in a way that leads right into, let's say, the next round of conversation, if you agree, which is really about that relational situation connected to the heartbreak. There was a quote in your text which was this very typical thing I think we all get to hear, that, there is a conversation starting about a potential collaboration, and I think the big hope or sentence in the space is, it'll probably go all well, right? And we do know that tends also not to happen, that it all goes just well. And the messiness of roles, also you said that it's a turn-taking situation, that creates all sorts of situations, feelings, tensions, surprises, and in terms of experience, I think that's an invitation to share a bit of when what is your experience in these situations? When do you sense, something is going into a direction? I might have to do something about it. And is there? Sometimes it's obvious what needs to be done next, and sometimes it's not so obvious. So there is something you would like to share?
I was just thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about like when it didn't go well as it should be, and then what happened?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you get illnesses after that.
Yeah.
Also, you learn from that as well. There's one occasion. I mean, I'm interested in the relationship with the nature in general, and I often go to the place that I don't know. And there's one time I got invitation to go to middle of Devon to talk about diversity and access. And it was very hard to get there. And I had a room full of white people. And talking about diversity and access with no shelter, I just felt like so lost there, and like, I don't know where I am and why am I talking about this here. And it was just went on for all nights, and I literally got really sick afterwards. And that carried on, but I just stick to that project. And it was collaboration work with the young Taey. We go to Breakwater together. And we exchanged those failures and feelings, but particularly when one of us had to go somewhere and had to carry a lot, it's quite hard to digest all together. But eventually, we, with other like producers and curators, we had a conversation about those times and why that's lack of care and lack of knowing that how this could be devised in the event in the middle of natural place that should be much more about rural place and countryside, and they could have an artist locally, but having someone come over to tick the box of diversity, why that is either side is unhappy about the situation. Yeah, I mean, there's no like wisdom by end of this experience, but it's made it very clear for both ends where we are standing. And project ended really well, and we had an honest conversation about it. That doesn't mean it will get changed, because the people have their agenda too. But I think it's important to know that when the project is happening, that do we need artists from elsewhere as a guest person, or do we want to nurture the local person in there?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And I could add an experience I find really interesting that you just shared, that your body responded, that you got sick. Because I also realized my body is a great indicator of how it works, how it goes. It's pretty clear at times. It really lets me know this is stressful. I was just sharing this morning, exactly, we were sitting together in a car, a situation that I experienced, and I do think that has to do with more and more disruptive times, being invited with an art project into a setting where a museum wanted to collaborate with a university in a quite small place in southern Germany. And so we had that round zero, great conversations, students in place, somebody from the university, somebody from the museum. We had to actually write an application together. So I really felt, well done, great. And it felt really good. And we got the funding, and in the course of that process, people went on long-term sick leave, all sorts of stuff started to happen. The museum director got informed that the building will be refurbished, and she had to take action. So literally there was no time anymore for this type of participatory artwork that was supposed to create a local web. So when I leave, the relationships are established, people have a third space for them, None of that happened because there was literally no time. Every time I took these 8-hour train trips actually, I already realized how I was full of tensions, because I mean, you can sense even, being the guest journeying to a place, no communication happened. It became really silent, and just when I was about to arrive a day before, action kicked in. And I know by now these type of relationships it's so event driven instead of really creating a conversational relationship. So in hindsight, and different to your situation, everybody shied away from a reflection at the end. So I was really left with pretty much nothing until today. So it has an after wave until today, this non-reflective moment. And even though I called for it and we went for dinner, but whoa, there was no way to get into, can we literally talk about our last year together? And to finish this up, I, in hindsight, thought it would have been very honest to say, we've planned this, great, let's give the money back. There's no time, space, resources, and energy for that. I think we probably would all have felt much better to be saying, it was a great idea, but it's not for now. So that's what came to my mind afterwards.
But also listening to what you've been experiencing, I think measuring the time and how long does it take to build the community and methodology to settled and have a legacy, that's long work. So having a 3 times workshop doesn't cut it. And you need to invite artists to having a research period and perhaps living there a little bit or building a relationship so that artists also have a time for that. But I mean, I know this is all adds up as a money, but I feel like can we slow down a little bit and expect a bit less of each other, which I find it really hard for myself too. And I like working with the same person over and over again because that's creates. Friendship is not easy word. It's, radical friendship is even more difficult word. I'm trying to be better friends, but it's always not. It's not coming quite naturally to me. Because language barrier, cultural barrier, there's many things needs to come together without having a political grounding together. I find it quite hard to just stay in light conversation sometimes. And I feel like, it's slowing down and working with the same people. In some way, I think that's what I appreciated. The Heart of Glass came back because I contributed for this last year, and then they re-questioned that. They reminds me of the question that I posed and revisit the question again. And I thought that's really interesting, to making the connection happening little by little in a very slow pace, but realizing that this is the building block.
Comments, questions, thoughts?
Okay.
Wow.
Okay, here we go.
That was better.
Hey. Yeah.
I suppose the question I was thinking about is the triangle, which is sometimes a square or some other shape. I'm just thinking about everyone's individual relationship to risk within that, and what that risk looks like collectively. The individual artist, what's at risk, what's at stake, the organisation, the community, other partners, and then what's the appetite for collective risk, and how do you take risk on those people's behalf? So just risk is the question.
I mean, I suppose for me, one of the things is, as an organisation, that we have put ourselves into a kind of political thing that we are not going to be bound by funding to take risk, and not a lot of people can do that because we're all so confined in these stipulations of what the funding says. So you're afraid to be radical. And I think the radicalness we're not seeing it as much, particularly in communities, because of that. So we've really put ourselves out there for that kind of stuff, but it's not easy. But then when it comes to the risk of young people, we're completely different. So, for example, one of the kind of a conflict that happened, and like that, we'd gone through all our roles and we'd done the fun, and we thought we were in it, and we were doing a piece on masculinity for one of our projects, and it was a group of boys, and they were 12, and they created a film. And we decided that we were going to bring them just themselves to see the film first before for them decide then who was the next public that they wanted to share this film with. And as soon as they seen it, 3 of the people were like, that's not going out into public.
Okay.
And they were like, they didn't like their voices, they didn't like what they were wearing, they didn't like how they looked, they didn't like how they were coming across. And all of a sudden, we went into this meltdown because the risk for them was too high to be exposed within their community and within the public, who already feel like they're not good enough all the time. So we ended up with our triangle completely broken then, because we were then supporting the young people to try and go through that process and look at the risk that's involved. And then the artist who wasn't prepared maybe for this, and again, that was a conversation we hadn't had, and we've learned that we have to talk about those things. But it was that idea that from the artist's point of view, their kind of funding depended on this output into public to share what they had and to have, you know, with their name. So then all of a sudden, what would happen if this didn't go into a public space? So then it was about that kind of thing of who is at risk here, and then all of a sudden everybody was at risk. And we didn't talk about collective risk. And that's an amazing point that you've made. I'm really going to take that again, like with me. I'm really glad you're after saying that, because it became individualised risk then for the different parts of the triangle. Now, we did work through it, and we went on that process, and, you know, everybody felt comfortable in the end when it went to public, but it became individual risk. So yeah, that's a really interesting thing you're saying.
I think I just think it's very interesting when you talked about contracting in how you establish those relationships. And we were talking earlier on about power. And one of the things it made me think of is the victim triangle that's talked about in transactional analysis, where the three parts of the triangle are the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. And whether there's a sensitivity around if you're going to be equal part, you know, we can't be equal because there's power there. But if that relationship's being established, and if that three-way relationship and the contracting, both around roles, but also style of communication and the balance between you, whether that can shift to being vulnerable rather than a victim, where we are open to ways out of that situation. And that's about individuals having both the vocabulary and the self-awareness of how to do that. Shifting from rescuer to supporter, and that significance in the language, again, that we use, and seeing rather than someone as a persecutor, but how that can shift to being assertive. Because often if we step into the relationship without recognising it or acknowledging it ourselves that we are the rescuer, we need to shift to being a supporter. Because if we are rescuer, we are containing those individuals in victim mode. And I think that links back to your collaborative approach of both contracting, but also in the delivery and reflection that you're doing. I just wondered what your response to that, especially when you've got that long-term relationship with the community. I think that's really, really significant and important.
Yeah. I mean, there's probably none, because that was amazing the way you said that, so well done. Totally agree with that. So yeah, no, I mean, the way you framed that is really interesting, and it's definitely something to think about. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing that you've brought. So it's not even a response I need. I just think, wow, yeah, well done you.
I'm where I come to from that is working in international development. I was a trainer for over 15 years with volunteers who went to work in different parts of the world, and they were not only people from the UK, Canada, the Netherlands going off to other countries, but actually working with people within those range of different countries around the world. And where if individuals were going into a community and viewing the community as broken, and somehow they were going in to fix, quite often when they left, the community would be left disempowered by the external input rather than empowered by it. But the externally funded people would go away feeling that they'd ticked all their boxes. They'd built a community centre. They'd dug some pit latrines. But actually, sometimes the pit latrines were being used as a place of punishment for children. to go to rather than a resource. So these assumptions we have from the outside going into a community.
Do you think there's I'm just thinking about, there's a sort of, is there a kind of underlying like economy driving this sort of dynamic that it's like, you know, there has to be this, as an artist you find jobs that you can be pushed into a community. I mean, it's almost like, I feel like we have to acknowledge that those structural forces, that it's not just, you know, people being bad practitioners. It's like there's a sort of economy of parachuting artists into problems, and it's like, you know, I don't have any answer of how you do that, but I think acknowledging that, I like what Pan's been saying, what you're saying, we're sort of trying to find strategies for countering the hegemony of that process, and it's a process that we can't just stop as an single organisation or through just theory. It's like, it's that collective, maybe a collective acknowledgement of those forces, making parachuting artists from outside and in, and then artists and organisations having to just cope, find strategies to cope. It's like, I think it's good, it's sort of empowering to think of it in those bigger forces, and then maybe we can sort of collectively share the stuff and what Pam can say. And so it's not a question of, I'm just sort of rambling.
No, but I think you're right, because all of the funding that we received is because the area that we are living and growing up in is called area of deprivation. You know, so that is that idea of that judgment is always there, and it's that idea that we're not actually disadvantaged. The problem is that we don't have the same economical resources as everybody else and the same access to things, and you know, whereas, you know, the class oppression is real, but you get funding based on this idea of deprived, you know, and so it's very real that it's this idea of parachuting in and fixing, but actually it is about, well, how do we give voices to the people who aren't part of the story, who aren't part of writing the history? So actually it's a way of you telling the story, and that's, for us, one of the best things about arts.
If I may pick up on that word parachuting to kind of glide into our third phase. I'm also a timekeeper. And no, but it is the perfect word, because we have also coming up with this idea of, you know, the paper plane idea, and then we were gaming around these words of landing, sinking, falling. Emery then sent me a text saying, oh yeah, within Art of Glass we use that phrase, building the plane whilst flying it, meaning that everything that you set out to do, it often requires that you have to create the conditions first. So taking that airspace, we also started to really think about, you know, and parachuting, I think, is a great term for that. We're currently facing wars and violent struggles that happen a lot through airstrikes, and so we have been quite aware about paper planes is not only a playful way to message things through the air, or it messages various things these days. So yeah, that is the introduction into this landing, sinking, falling, ways of arriving in places. And you know, comes to mind.
I mean, we are witnessing speechless violence everyday basis, and how easy that is executed without compassion, without someone actually doing it. The killing became much more technological, press button kind of thing. And it's when the airplane, paper airplane idea, which was really playful and just knowing that this space, I knew that it's going to work, but we couldn't stop thinking about what does it mean to use the airspace, and who owns that airspace, and how does this bathe, and how does that get to travel? I mean, this is all really complex idea, but that's the point. It's like this heartbreak is so complex. Is the migrant coming in? Is the deprived area where the funding should go? Do we let them in? Do we let them out? How do we stitch the parachute? If the parachute could be a hope, if parachute could be a prey, we are literally witnessing how this is done. So, like heartbreakingly. And when you came up, you were talking about the recent leaking story in Ireland, right?
Yeah, about using the airspace from the US to Israel to obviously bring ammunition and whatever it was that they were bringing, but that there hasn't been a sanction, and there's a lot of protests down at the airport and stuff, about this, that for, the country of Ireland, that how is it that it's okay for the airspace to be used, and actually what is the real relationship that's going on underneath that? Because are we really fighting for the support of Palestine or anything like people who are suffering, so that was just, we were talking about that, and at the time we had that conversation, there was a big thing in the media about the Irish airspace is being used to transport, violent ammunition and stuff.
So as Katie was saying, that we are the people who questioning that, okay, is that okay to use the ocean to have a gas pipe go through, which is over the centuries and centuries, all the sea space has been used as a ground to make the infrastructural colonial destruction is happening underneath, but we are talking about the airspace having that delivery of the violence as well. And then we are asking a question, so then what's the ownership of that? I mean, the borderlines of the sea space is quite new concept. It's like 1920s or something like that. Before then, nobody sees like with common space. And suddenly, like monarchy say, well, this is loyal space. We're going to call it as a loyal space. And then, no, France was saying that, oh, they've got so much colonies. We are going to say that 120 kilometers up to the seashore is our space, our territory. And after that is the deep space. It's like everybody's space. And we're literally debating that how much are we talking about? How deep are we talking about? We are not just the one surface. It's actually having a volume underneath and a volume above. But then in our heart is, I'd like to think that we are volumeless. There's huge capacity and huge space. But also we are stretched by sustaining life, care for others, and we are pulled apart constantly. So I guess I feel like my job is that having a little room, or it could be a drawer, just a little space for myself, that's just for me. Because I need to keep that space in order to carry on. Otherwise, we are just pulling apart. I guess I'm emphasizing that we can't always be sacrificed for the community. Sometimes we have to look after ourselves in order to carry on. Airspace, we had this discussion when we were thinking, is our audience can hold this conversation too? So thank you for bringing that up. And yeah.
Maybe I want to add to that in terms of space or landing in relational aesthetics. I just got a text message during lunch by a friend that I would call one of my critical friends in Kate's definition. And she said, oh, I've just read a brilliant word. How about, we always talk about self-care, but in terms of our friendship or friendship in general, how about the term other care? And I don't know if that's a new term. I heard it or read it for the first time during lunch, and I thought, other care, meant to be the care between these critical friends. I really touched me very much, because I do think, and I took that from Kate's sharing here today, I do think this practicing as a guest, often as a guest, means it's not only you. You bring a whole bunch of actually spirits with you.
Yeah.
It's like a whole crowd moving in, even if people might not know, but yeah, they are coming in as well. And then actually the whole crowd meets the local crowd or whoever is part of that context. So I just, thought about that way of landing in a situation where I am usually invited to be a guest, often temporarily. Yeah. There's a plane coming.
There's also the raised hand. Also.
Yeah, please.
At the beginning, I misheard what you said, Susanne, and you repeated it, thank goodness, because I thought you said, we'll have to start with the violence. And of course then said, I'm going to start with the values. But I think it's interesting that where you've come in the conversation, and I really thank you all, is that in the end, we've come to the violence because this is where you were talking about, artists coming in and being asked to be rescuers and things like that, because we're talking about the violence of war, but we're also talking about the violence of economics, of inequality, of gender, of class. We're talking, all these things are a form of violence. And I just wondered whether maybe that's in a way where we need to start. We have our values, but what we're dealing with is violence. And I think, this is where we are in the world, and I think it's, becoming more and more obvious, the violence that you think. So thank you so much that you got there, and it was interesting to me that you did start with values and ended with violence, but I think it was really important that we talked about the violence, so thank you.
Here we go. What are you proudest of in your practice? So thank you for that question. Should I read the second one as well? Just to tell us about a time you have had to say no, however you understand that. Why did you feel that way? How did you convey that? What was the response to your no? Oh.
I suppose for me the no comes a little bit easier when your values are rocked. So for me, sometimes we get invited into things, maybe with, say, different organisations or something, and an example would have been just recently that there was this new kind of arts festival created in the community, and I suppose when it was supposed to be all the different organisations of that area coming together to do this piece, but when we kind of went to a couple of the meetings, we realised that the lens was not based on the values of the organisation and what was important for us and young people. And so we said no, and we stepped out of that. And we've had backlash about that ever since. But for us, it's a very firm, the no was the right one, even though it didn't mean that for others. So that was one. And then I suppose, what am I proudest of my practice? I think for me, it's been about being able to step back and see where I'm at in that place. And what is it that I brought? And then what did I not bring? What am I accountable for? What am I adding to? So being able to be really critical of who I am without damaging myself, but actually knowing that it's amazing to be able to go, you messed up there, so get back in there quick, and and just be really able to be honest. I really believe in radical honesty, and I believe in authenticity, and that's taken me a long time, growing up as a woman from a working class area who had a mask on her whole life, because I had to pretend I was something else to fit into this world. And now I can just be who I am. And so that's probably it.
Both difficult questions, because I'm not very good at both of them. I think, Okay. There's one time that I was invited to devise a performance about the rest and listening, which is my favorite subject. But the way the conversation went was so restless. And I had to say, no, I can't carry on. Because it's the subjectivity that I have to bring in. And I mean, we talked about the self-care and we talk about this often. But the idea of the rest as a resistance and caring for yourself as a resistance, I think it really has deeply coming from resistance for the racial capitalism. So when Western privileged people saying about the self-care, I feel like there's so much bullshit there. It's more about like well-being and very westernized concept of devising or appropriating the language of the rest. But rejection sometimes, they're saying that no is also privilege. You can afford to say no. And sometimes I work with a community that they have no privilege to have a political position because they do have that conversation in the kitchen sink or like in the toilet, but day to day, just literally bread to the mouth is much more critical than having a political standpoint. So for having a political standpoint is important, but also not everybody can do that. So when you can do that, when you are in that position, realizing that I'm also representing the person who has the opinion, but not being able to afford that opinion as well. What I am proud of for my practice, I'm quite sort of slow and shy person in general, and I'm doubting myself a lot. That's just how I construct myself, I guess. But I'm trying to get out of it. I recognize that my sort of Korean cultural makeup was very much based on the competition, being a good person, being a productive person, and which is very hurting my own body, but also the way I see the world. So I'm really trying hard to decolonize myself before I decolonize anything else. But I come to the age where I can see my value. I can see I am speaking that nobody speaks, or the way that I do make work somehow appreciates it. Maybe I think that tenacity of it, that returned to the same way to making a relationship appreciate each other, just simple, seeing the person as a holistic person. Maybe that's my value. Maybe that's what I need to be proud of.
Great. I find that really two brilliant questions to open up to all of us here. I mean, we have 5 minutes to go, and I do think it's two really great questions. Yes!
Nice. That is very impressive with this.
Wow.
Whatever.
Wow. Do you want to open it?
No, go ahead.
Can I take a picture?
Yeah, should we open it? I'm not so sure. Wow.
That's amazing.
Shall I?
No, there is nothing.
This is also great. It's beautiful.
My question, I'm sorry, but it's
beautiful.
too long and I can't put it on the airplane. And I'm sorry that it will be that long, but I need to explain myself why am I asking that exactly. So I'm a youth worker. I'm working with youngsters for more than 15 years already. I started as a volunteer when I was like 15 years old. And when my first mentors, when they were the youth workers, when they were working with me, they were giving their heart and soul in what they were doing. Currently, I'm working in one organization in my country, in Bulgaria, and we are working with youngsters in a very educational environment. I'm doing an academies. And recently we started a project, and because you start talking about the project, that's why I wanted to ask that question. And when I started that project, I started with some colleagues from another organizations from Latvia. Currently, we are doing an educational board game based on the theory of the mode for intelligence of government. That board game should be work for youth workers with people in a multicultural environment and people with a specific educational needs. And at the beginning, the idea was great, and we were so motivated. And then when we start doing it, actually, the dreams had to meet the reality. And I started seeing something that I didn't ever expect that I was going to see in that kind of work. And what I actually saw was that when we had to associate with another organizations or to co-expert or even an artist, I saw something that kind of work is becoming some kind of a business. It is like the people more rarely are giving their heart and soul in what they're doing, and it's more like we have to meet the minimum requirements. We have to do that because that's what we promised when we write a project. We don't have to overwork. Should we do that? Can we afford that? What about the money? Everything is too expensive. So, do you think that this is the way how the things are working right now? And there is another way. Do you have situations how you like that one? And if you have them, how you actually deal with them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important thing to say, and I think that you're explaining that from where you're working, and in Ireland we see the exact same thing, and we would blame the state for that. So the idea of we are privatising and we are doing this thing called tendering of services where they are now competing against each other for resources, but also the governance. So we are now over-governed in everything we do, that we have to be accountable for stuff. And myself and Kate are in a group called the Red Wheelbarrow, and it is to talk specifically about how governance is impacting on communities. And this idea that you have to, instead of you being valued, you are now having to show value for money. So how are we giving, how has this become the rhetoric now where it's like how many young people to do how many things, how many days for how many hours? That becomes the narrative instead of what is the work that you're creating. Tell us more about that educational piece and what impact that's going to have. Nobody's asking them questions because we've moved into a quantitative capitalist evaluation method that once bums are on seats, or maybe that you could possibly sell that game now that you're thinking about. You know, that's what has become, because we've moved into that business model, and it's destroying communities, it's destroying the youth sector, it's destroying lots of different sectors. And it is about how do we find solidarity to fight against that, because it's the state that are causing that. And then you're 15 years in, so you get it from then, and you've been mentored by people who were also in it 30 years ago, but people who are coming in it in the last 2 years, 3 years, this is all they know. So we have to be the people to change. Yeah.
Closing words. Thank you so much. Thank you all so much. As there's an afternoon of workshops, I just thought it's really interesting, you know, the practice of wayfinding and landing, the type of journey we undertook. And in a way, Chrissy, you phrased it really well, from starting with values to, you know, now we're at the moment starting to unpack the violence of structures that we are facing everywhere. And I think we all currently undergo this experience, and becomes more and more obvious, no matter from, you know, where we practice. So it's a bit hard to leave it here right now, to be honest. I find a slight discomfort to kind of not say, let's continue with this right now, right here, but as we all kind of find each other in workshops now, who knows how we will pick up on that topic. And so thank you very much, all of you. And great audience.